We don't know if the vaccines work or don't work. They're still pushing vaccines, but they're making little kids wear masks. Wow, follow the science. No, they're following the political science. That's the problem. Let's continue. Go.
The weaponization of science accelerated with the arrival of COVID, but it began with the battle over climate policy.
Climate legislation is infrastructure legislation.
There's the Einstein of our time right there. Don't tell me you can't bartend your way to being the smartest person on the planet. Go ahead.
Disputes among scientists can be intense, but at some point in the last decade, the impatient proponents of climate change enlisted the media to suppress dissent.
You're an expert on modeling, scientific modeling, and of course the models are what drive a lot of the predictions. How credible do you think those models are, and how much uncertainty exists in those models?
There's a lot of uncertainty in the models, and unfortunately, the uncertainty is growing as the models become more sophisticated with each generation.
Social media companies such as Facebook have tried to suppress the objections of scientists and authors like Stephen Koonin. But dissent, perhaps the most honorable of political traditions, is being demoted into oblivion as, quote, misinformation.
There's a reason why it's called COP26. There's been 25 of them before that. We've actually been doing this charade, if you will, for 30 years now. And the UN did a surprisingly honest appraisal of the last decade of climate impacts. What they said was, despite we've had the Paris Agreement and we've had 10 years of talks, we can't tell the difference between the world we're actually in and a world where we hadn't done anything about climate since 2005.
Science is about progress, but it cannot be progress if a significant portion of the population believes that what scientists are telling them about climate and COVID is mostly, to pick a word, disinformation.
Every day you appear on TV, you do more damage than good when it comes to educating the public on COVID.
During the pandemic, too many scientists have aligned themselves with the authoritarians of certitude.
The anger that's developed with you, Dr. Fauci, is that you don't want to give us advice. You want to tell us what to do.
The confusions multiplying around the Omicron variant mean people will continue to disbelieve what they're told to do until serious dissent gets more respect.
The idea that our entire social life can be upended by essentially a relatively narrow set of scientists, a narrow set of public health people, we have to build protections against that clearly in our political systems.
Mm-hmm. The problem is building protections against it in our political system. Isn't that the problem right now with our political system? Isn't that the problem right now with our culture and the Democrat Party? The popularity of the autocrats, the totalitarians, the spreading of American Marxism, the idea which he talks about, certitude, but I would reverse it. The certitude of science? How about the certitude of ideology? People say, well, Mark, you're an ideologue. You believe in the Constitution and liberty. That's not ideology, that's philosophy. There's a difference. Philosophy is a way of thinking that can be adjusted, that should be somewhat flexible, based on certain unflexible principles. Ideology is something that you believe, it's a viewpoint that you press no matter what. So you're still a Marxist after 100 million people have been killed from one end of the world to the other? People are starving to death, they're impoverished, it's corrupt. That's an ideology, I would argue. I'm the only one that makes this distinction as far as I know, but that's how I make the distinction. And it's true. And so I don't see how you're going to have a check on the autocrats in science who work for the federal government when their masters, that would be the politicians, are of the same mindset. When their masters, and that would be the media, are of the same mindset. And so this is the problem. This is the problem I wrote about in American Marxism. It affects science. It affects morality. It affects liberty. It affects basics like the ability to make food and distribute food and eat food. That is capitalism in the broader sense. So it has an impact on everything. The scientists have to step in line and follow the routine, follow the orders. That's what it's all about, and that will be subsidized. I've had experts come on the various platforms and they explain the reason we have more scientists that push this idea of climate change and the sky is falling is because they're subsidized. If you have somebody who says, no, that's not the case, they're a denier, they get the scarlet letter, and they're on their own. And you have somebody like Chuck Todd, and I've now mentioned this in 2 books, who is not a very bright man, quite frankly. He's not a good journalist because he's not a journalist. He's all, with the Democrat Party because his wife is with the Democrat Party. When he announces on his program a few years back that they will not have anybody on their program who is a climate change denier, there are thousands of scientists, meteorologists, climatologists, all kinds of physicists from top schools, practitioners, who take a different approach that, number one, the Earth isn't warming, or if it's warming, it's because of the sun, or if it's warming, there's not a damn thing we can do about it. You saw Bjorn Lomborg there. He wrote a book, and his book talks about, yeah, it's warming a little bit, but not really out of emergency, or out of fear that we should be worried about all these things happening because they're not going to happen. And when you think about it as a practical matter, they can't tell you the weather 3 weeks from now. How do they know what the temperature of Earth is going to be 50 years from now? They don't have the foggiest idea. No idea whatsoever. And the debate on science is more a debate on politics. And the debate on politics is more of a demand of uniformity and conformity than a debate at all. So Ayn Rand wrote a lot of great books, but she wrote The Return of the Primitive, which I've cited, I think, in a couple of books, but I certainly mentioned on radio as well. And she talks about something that's very, very important, this environmental movement. They didn't call it climate change at the time, but she said they've changed their tactics in many respects, but in one particular respect, she noted, they used to say that capitalism couldn't provide for the people. And now they've switched their argument to capitalism is greedy and provides too much for the people of the United States. See the point? And climate change, as we would call it today, or the use of the environment to attack capitalism and to attack the level of living in the United States, has become the tool of the left and the intellectuals. And of course, she was right. And so this whole thing about climate change really has not been set forward in a way where the science can support it. And so what happens is, when you have a debate over these sort of things, big tech is censoring and silencing individuals who don't agree with it. Big media is censoring and silencing individuals who don't agree with it. They character assassinate true experts and scientists who are geniuses, brilliant, from Princeton and MIT and other places, who've written about this and talked about it and said, wait a minute, this is these tests, these models are not correct. They have, a lot of them cannot get tenure. A lot of them lose their jobs. Almost all of them get no federal funding whatsoever. You may say, well, nobody should. Okay, but many do. And many of their publications won't get printed. And you know they're not going to be on Meet the Press or NBC because Chuck Todd announced it. But they won't be on any of these channels. So when I go on radio or here and I say to Chuck Todd, why not have a debate with these people? Since you know so much, and since the experts you rely on know so much, why not allow some of these people with PhDs and beyond PhDs who've written extensively on these matters, debate it? It's just like the virus issue. How many people have you seen on these Sunday shows that have a different view? You'll see now and then a guy from Stanford or this one or that one, but not on a regular basis. Not on a regular basis. So we don't get from our news the kind of information we need. All of it has been politicized, and you notice it's been politicized in one direction, towards more government less freedom, more power for those who bark out these arguments and so forth, and the dismissal and diminution of individuals who take a different position. I don't know where we'd be if the people who do this to us, who devour debate and competition of ideas, I don't know where we'd be if they succeeded 500 years ago. So what Ayn Rand called this is these are the primitives. Because what she said was, if you are not free to discuss these issues, if you are not free to have a conflict, to have a debate, if you are not free to have competing scientific ideas legitimately, then this is an attack on what? On what? Your brain. Because what they're saying is, you may think something, but keep your mouth shut. You can't test it. You can't promote it. You can't even institute it. Keep your mouth shut. So it's an effort to stupefy people, to dumb down people, and to make them compliant.
For more, sign up for Levin TV.